Hello, my name is Tabea Hirza and I prepared a small presentation about a software I'm developing for about 10 years. Not in a very active development because originally back in 2012 I actually designed it as a kind of spreadsheet just for my personal use. And in the last few years I realized that it could have a larger purpose and it could be useful for more people. So I started a dialogue in understanding what the specific needs of others and in other contexts could be and how to improve it. It will take more or less an hour, I think, to present all the slides. I hope I will not lose too much time because I did not prepare this presentation. It's just like a discussion among friends. Please take it like that. First of all, my motivation, besides that I needed it for my own experience as a teacher of different contents, especially in language teaching and music, I have developed a more specific understanding of what actually the use could be of creating a software that helps to improve the design and the development of learning content and lesson plans or learning scenarios, however you call this. I call it learning scenario based on my own education from Europeana and European School Network, but other terms are very similar and more or less we mean the same. We mean a standardized and organized way in teaching content and other approaches to students. There is currently a tool I found which is called Novigado. We will not speak about it. It was this tool that really made me aware of how useful such a tool could be, and it also showed me how much more advanced my own approach was. So I thought it could be valuable, and if you think the same, feel free to contact me and we can discuss in which way we might collaborate. So there are probably 10 key motivations. To standardize the learning on different open source platforms like Moodle, WordPress, Drupal. We will speak later on about this. To enable content designers to concentrate on creative tasks. This is one of my priorities because uploading frameworks, learning frameworks and competency frameworks is really a huge work. I finished this work completely for the current standard in education of Spain, which is about close to 9,000 entries, which need to be connected in a very specific way, and each minor mistake ends up in messing up the whole database. So this is a task I try to delegate, and it's not easily delegated. It's often done quicker or faster by oneself, especially if the final outcome is not very clear. So the idea that I could have a software that really holds all these data and just with a few clicks coordinate these contents and get a scheme, not necessarily a real learning scenario, but a scheme how to combine different topics, would be fantastic. It would also enable course creators to develop easier multiple paths. So if you have one learning scenario, you could easily switch and recombine it. That is another idea. It would also improve algorithms for adaptive learning platforms. Moodle, for example, is definitely prepared for adaptive learning, and I'm using it in that way. This would help to do that in a more systematic way and assess directly pedagogical needs. It could enhance personalization of learning in a coherent and complete way. This is the origin of my approach. I started with CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning, in 2012, and majorly I did not have courses, but I had individual clients or students with very specific needs. So I was looking for a way to reuse material and very quickly, over the run, during the lesson, to recombine it for the specific student. And I did that with a spreadsheet and it worked out, and actually everything else I did is based on this spreadsheet. Then another approach is recently I'm more and more also in exchanging ideas about how we can do in a simple way STEAM content, especially if we are not very multidisciplinary teachers, which is mostly not the case. Most teachers, especially in the higher levels, are more and more specialized in mathematics or in language or in science or whatever. So it becomes more and more difficult to create a STEAM content, and the idea is to facilitate this task to teachers and to help them to concentrate fully on the creativity of the lesson and the delivery of the lesson, and to lose less time with the design of learning content. In general, to make adaptive learning paths not only for platforms but in general, give learners more control over learning content. This comes rather from a frustration I had with official editorial material. For example, in Spain we have a very detailed catalogue of female composers, but among all the official material that is used in public schools, none is including a single composer. So it is not because of a lack or the lack of awareness, because the very Ministry of Education is documenting and producing this material, but editorials for some reason do not integrate it. Even I have found that is a gender issue, but I have even found content-based issue. I have found materials and more than one where content was missing from the learning plan. So it was not really based on the national framework. It just lacked content. And this is very dangerous because these books or CD-ROMs or whatever is used nowadays, downloadable material, is meant for teachers who have no time or want to dedicate more time to more essential things, more pedagogical things. And it is it should be a help, and the teacher will use this book as a guidance and will not even realize that the content is missing. I would not have realized that until I started connecting it with the competencies, and I realized that there are competences which are completely missing, and even content topics. And if you are frustrated with that, this could give more control to combine it in your own way and make your own checklist if everything is there just by using the whole framework. I have also the hope for the future that it could help to make a higher interconnectivity among different applications of assessment. I mean, course entrance, so from one course to the other, that you have a more clear view if somebody really knows what she or he should know, but also for job entrance, what we know as a curriculum so far. So it is more this kind of token-based knowledge assessment, and we could perhaps do that through LOD, linked open data, and connect this in a more fluid way through the Internet of Things, on the one side with the national institutes in charge of defining standards with businesses using these standards in their daily work life, and defining what is really necessary and what the internet is offering freely for learning content. So people could actually, my dream would be something like people could program their internet browser in a way like, if they give the permit, like marking what they are looking for or what they are needed to learn, and then the browser would focus more on this content and give some more input on this content, like a seamless learning approach, just by navigating through the internet. I'm thinking especially about all these kids who are engaged with TikTok and YouTube all day. That could convert these tools in a very powerful way of teaching. It also helps to enable comparability among different learning contents, because I work currently with the Spanish framework, with the German framework, the French, the British, and the Canadian, and up to some degree also the one of the United States. And I'm touching certain topics also from Chinese frameworks. So what I realize is that in most fields there is not a lot of difference on what we want to know and what we want to teach. And frameworks are shaped more or less in a similar way. There are differences, and of course there are regional contents which vary, but the essence of the contents are not so different. It's like, let's say, students learn about the course of a river and how the river is shaped and what the different parts of a river are called, and then they apply to their local content, to their local context. But there is a lot in common, and when you compare this in a systematic way, you become very aware of that. Why do I think this is interesting? I mean, besides PISA studies and competition among countries, which could also make learning more fun in the sense of really competing among each others in a kind way, it is most interesting because I started developing some programs for student exchange, not in the sense that you go to another country and learn within their national system and within their local context, but online exchange in the sense that we do things together with kids from Canada or kids from Finland, such as online storytelling through Minecraft or similar things. And in this case, it would be most helpful if we can assist participating tutors, mentors, or even all the students who want to take control over their learning experience, which of their national content they are actually addressing with their activity. So they can just play and exchange and stay together, but they are learning and they can assist their learning and get a feedback on that. So this is more or less the motivation of all this, and it is in a very poor and very initial state, but I already feel that I need more exchange, and this is why I'm presenting it. First of all, let's go one step back. In recent times, and there are already a lot of articles around, we have really a kind of boom in developing new learning approaches and giving fancy names to everything, and usually with acronyms, which is all wonderful. And I have made specific courses for every of these approaches. I have found, perhaps there are more, and you will tell me about that. But the thing is, it is not making teaching easier. It's making it complex. It's making it confusing. And when you build learning content for others, you start actually thinking, what is really the difference? Especially because to make my work as a learning designer, a content designer and a learning experience designer, I want to reuse material. That makes my job more efficient. So I have to understand how I can reuse it and how it really connects and what we are really speaking about. And this made me a little bit organize and systemize different learning approaches according to their needs and to the way we can actually frame them and assist them. And I found there are only 3 major groups of learning approaches. At the end of this presentation, there is a short link which you can use to give me a feedback on different questions that might come up in this presentation, and I would be really, really happy to receive some answers if you like what I say, if you share my opinion, or if you are able to contribute with a very divergent view and could improve what I'm doing by correcting me or by adding something I'm missing, but also by giving your own experiences. This will be wonderful. I say already thank you. So the 3 major groups I found: the traditional curriculum-based learning approach, of course, which is more sophisticated than it seems, then the active learning approaches, and community learning. I will briefly show how they are defined and how they connect. Curriculum-based approaches can be divided into 3 groups: competency-based learning, or CBL, knowledge-based learning, KVL, and content-based learning. Content-based learning is the typical 19th century teaching, and it comes out of this tradition, or it's not really a tradition, it's only 200 years old, but of this approach to understand knowledge in classes of disciplines. And disciplines are broken down into topics, themes, syllables, or methods. So the learner takes on a role of a disciple or a follower, like in YouTube. A YouTube channel is nothing else than the distribution of some knowledge or content, even if it's quite nonsense, but it is a kind of discourse, something people should think, know, or do, and the audience are just repeating it, learning it by mind and reproducing it. So when they are really good in doing that, they become a scholar or an influencer themselves. And the assessment, how it works, is actually through propagation, redistribution. If we have a lot of clicks, if we resend it to others, we know that it works. Or the academic career, yeah, if we have a lot of students, we have a lot of publications, if these publications are read a lot, and so on. This is all this very, very classical way of approaching education in the last 2 centuries. The outcome is a shared language, a method, or a dogma. Yeah, churches are also working like that. They are probably the inventors of this kind of education, and this type of education has been quite lost interest in recent years, but I would say it will never really lose importance because of the outcome. We need a shared language. Content-based learning is, for example, an efficient storytelling. It seems very innovative, but a story is nothing else than a guided and organized content of something, a message that should go through and should be repeated. So don't throw it completely away. This is one way we can learn, and we have to keep it inside our contents, and we can see that most frameworks are doing it. The knowledge-based learning comes very much out from this KVL, this self-assisted learning. What we actually start with is a skill or a knowledge that can be applied, and this is the difference to competency-based learning. There we have the goal to assist skills and knowledge which can be tested in some way, but they do not necessarily need to be applied. I would define the difference like that. You might do that in a different way. The learner in competency-based learning is more like an adept who becomes a master, like judo, for example. All Asian martial arts are following a competency-based learning approach. If you have done martial art, you have a full understanding how that works. You have a catalog of things you should know and do, even a vocabulary, certain movements, certain katas, or in other languages of Asia they are named in different ways, but you have like a theoretical approach, you have a let's say a standardized choreography, and you have the free fight, which is more like the applied part of it. And usually in the school environment we do this through question and answers, but there are more creative ways to do that, more engaging ways, and it's still competency-based learning outcome, learning, and we have as an outcome objective testable answers. So you could actually ask a student, so what do you know about the French Revolution? And they can tell you more or less about it, but you can test that. And you can have a rubric, or you can have a yes no answer, or 1 and 1 is 2 or 3 or whatever. So in knowledge-based learning, it's more for self-evaluation, and what you actually get as an outcome is confidence. So this is very good also for kind of tests in an environment, like in training for emergency or these kind of things, for example, because you can make your own checklist. I know this, and this is where I need to improve. This is all curriculum based. This is usually what you will see in a standard traditional curriculum also, like I know to do this, I have experience in that. Knowledge based learning is also job experience that is in your curriculum, so that means knowledge based learning. And content based learning, of course, is also in the traditional curriculum. Now we are very fond of active learning, and I think this is also for a reason, because it's much more fun, it's much more creative, but it's also more demanding in many aspects. We have here 4 different types: inquiry based, problem based, project based, and challenge based. There might be some divergent explanations of what this is. I did a little research on that and took out of it what I consider the most convincing explanation. Again, if you have a better one, I'm very open to learn about it. Inquiry based starts with a question. So we have these big questions like the school in the cloud, for example, this kind of approach. In problem-based, we have also a question, but it's more like a practical problem in real life. But we do not necessarily need to resolve it in real life. So this could be like, for example, a case study. We study 2 companies and they have a problem, and we see different ways how to solve the problem, and we could even create a third solution for a third company or something like that. So in no moment is it necessary to go to the company or to do something. It's just a thought experiment. In project-based learning, we are meant to do something in the sense of really solving something. Like they would ask us to make a mechanical machine, for example, out of scrap, and we would have to do that and apply a lot of knowledge to do that. In challenge-based learning, we go even a step further. We are not just doing something, but we are really giving our heart into it, like we are getting engaged with something. Typical challenge-based projects are a school garden, or a school aquarium, or going out and picking up garbage from the beach, or these kind of things. Especially not if the teacher is making an excursion and says, okay, we'll make a field trip and we take the garbage out. More in the sense when students really become like the leaders of a project in which they define what has to be done and do it. Challenge-based learning is not only about activism in an ecological or other sense. It can be something completely neutral in moral terms, like for example a radio, school radio as a project. Okay, so the learner role for inquiry-based learning is the one of an investigator who explores, discovers, and tests. So the mentor would be a questionnaire, the one who is always triggering and asking, not really giving solutions. If you give solutions, you break the whole process down. And usually we use rubric, but there are more ways in assessing that. And the learning outcome will be the answer or the solution given by the investigator. The problem-based learning, actually inquiry-based learning, is the typical way of learning at the doctoral degree, even nowadays in a master's degree, because you also have a work, and very often also at the graduate level already. So we are integrating that in a formal way for decades already. Problem-based learning is putting the learner more in the role of an engineer who defines, measures, applies all these kind of the engineering process. And the mentor is a supervisor. So we are speaking here of engineering in a mental way. It could be applied, but it must not be, remember. Also, rubric is a good way to assess, and the outcome is a learning object, something like a presentation, for example, about our solution, where we define the different steps. Project-based learning is very similar, but it's more like a consultant. The learner is also looking at stakeholders, different focuses, alternative approaches, and so on. And the mentor would be a kind of auditor. The difference is really how much we apply the problem, how much is real action integrated, and that it takes usually a little bit longer. It's very overlapping with problem-based. Again, we have rubric, for example, on an exhibition or presentation, and the outcome is this exhibition or presentation. And of course, the object. So, for example, if we make a mechanical machine, we would have a presentation of this machine, but the outcome is the machine. Whereas in a problem-based learning, the outcome is the presentation on some machine or a case study. In the challenge-based learning, the learner is an activist, and the mentor is the one who challenges the activist. So it's like the role of the devil, perhaps, but not necessarily, or a co-activist who is also engaging, like, let's do it together. And the assessment, this is very important. I think this is usually not the case, but I mean, it's happening, but it's not assessed in that way, that the students or the learners actually live a transformation. They experience a personal transformation, and they transform their environment, their group or their place or whatever. So the outcome is really the engagement, and there should be a certain continuancy or a correction, because perhaps through the experience they realize it is not what I actually meant to do, and correct their engagement. The last one, this is the continuancy. There I have just put together some resources. In any case, I will put the link of this slide and you can go through it quietly. The last one is community learning. And here again, we can really define 3 different types of community learning, because community learning is based on 3 elements. If you remember, it has always a place, a community or the people, and a technology. So depending if we start from the place, or the place is given, then it's a place-based, like outdoor learning, GLAM. Not every outdoor learning must be community learning or place-based learning. Yeah, we can just go on a baobab tree and learn mathematics. That is not necessarily place-based learning, unless we count the leaves of the baobab tree. We can go to a museum and just do some drawings and get the inspiration there. That is not necessarily GLAM. GLAM is a little bit more, but still it is place-based perhaps. Community-based, very typical is, for example, the communities of practice or the open space technology. I will not go into more details. And technology-based, this is probably the one that is least addressed, and we might see that more in the future. I'm not thinking so much about using IT or these kind of things. When we think about technology nowadays, we think about IT. I think about technology in a broader sense, starting from making fire. When we speak about technology, each community has a kind of core set of tools they use to make their wealth. So, for example, in Switzerland, not in every area, but one of the dominant tools are data center services like banking or insurances. So there's a set of tools around these activities they do on their daily life, which enable them to do that. And this will be the technology they use to produce what they produce. Whereas in, let's say, in Anatolia, for example, people are more based on construction, on mining and agriculture, especially agriculture. So the tools they use to produce that will be very different. We would probably speak more about irrigation, about engines and these kind of things, whereas the Swiss would probably speak more about ventilation, about energy efficiency, because of the high costs of data centers and these kind of things. So yeah, this is the idea. Then since I'm coming from CLIL, just to remind, in CLIL we have also this approach, because we have language for learning, which is actually the language we need if we want to stay in a place. Like if you are a German and you want to live in China, you should learn some Chinese to move around in this place. Language through learning is actually when you engage with people. Let's say you are learning Greek and you go to Greece, or you know Greek people in your area, and you speak with them, you are constantly learning. So that is also the community-based approach. And language of learning is the theoretical part. It's actually the language itself that you are learning, the grammar and all these kind of things that that you need to understand what you are doing and helps you to improve. So more or less I have already explained how that works, and it is especially an approach that helps to create more identification with places, with groups, but also with workflows and standard principles. These are three different approaches, and the question is how they connect, especially when we use learning standards. So where do I use learning standards? I'm working for about 15 years now with Moodle. So I started with Moodle 1, I think, and it has really gone huge steps since then. It has nothing to do with what it was, and still it looks quite similar, but its inside has improved so much. And when I design courses or content, I usually use the course level. Then inside the course are activities. Then we have learning plans, which have their template level and an individual connection to each user, and scales, which connect the outcome of learning to users, and learning plans and frameworks. And the competencies are flowing through all this, and the question is how. And this is what I want to show a little bit, especially because as far as I have learned, because I'm also using WordPress for even longer time, and I tested it as a learning content learning management system as well, so we can do actually the same things in most of the open source platforms. A word of awareness: competencies and outcomes are used in a quite strange way in Moodle, and it is not totally clear what the difference is. There is a whole framework to assess learning based on outcomes, and if I'm not fully wrong, I think Exabis, which is based on the national standard of Austria, is using outcomes in order to assess learning outcomes. So yeah, what the word says. So assess the knowledge of students. I tested this, and it would go too far for which reasons, but in my specific case it was not useful. It had some missing parts, and I could not do everything I wanted to do. This is the only reason why I'm not using it, because I used it in the past, and I also tried this approach. I might return to it because this also depends very much on the upgrades Moodle is doing and the development of plugins others are doing for Moodle. So at the moment I use only competencies, and I will show in which way that can be used. I will not explain how to install competencies, how using competencies, and all these kind of things which you can find by searching through Moodle. I will only explain the questions I have in relation to frameworks and standard assessment of knowledge. At the course level, you can find competencies at the course level actually here. So I will show you. When you click, you open the course and you click on more. This is my learning platform. You might have a different design, but you will always find it somewhere in the upper bar of the course, and you start with competencies. Then when you open these competencies, you see a very long list. This is only a fraction of it, where you can see everything you have added to a course. So this is not for each activity. These are all the available competencies, and here what I do is I add everything I think at the end of the course the student or the learner should know. And after, you will see here the different activities. So when you design a learning content, you also have your own control that you have content for each competency. At the activity level, you can also define them. You actually must do that. And then you will see in the list we have seen before, in this list, you can see the activity that is added to a specific competence. And you will see that you can add several competencies to a single activity, and you can also add a competence to several activities, which makes the tool really sufficiently flexible. Inside the activity, you can manage all that on the settings. So you know you have this general details about the activity, and when you scroll down, you have competencies. This will be more or less the last thing you can modify in your activity, and here is where you add your competencies. I have a little bit more fields which I'm hiding here because it's not part of this topic. So if you have custom fields for your activity, you can add them here, and you see them here. So it will take a little bit more to find the competencies. When you add them, here I have added 3 different competencies to one single activity, and this is how it shows then all these activities under the respective competencies in the competencies list at the course level. The question of grades, actually grades are also created at the activity level, as you know, and when they are added, they are assigned to the competencies which are added to the same activity. Here, personally, I have an issue because I'm running Moodle 4, and since upgrade 3.8, I think, I was not able to see the learning plans anymore, and somehow this messed with the grade competency connection. I have no direct way to see that for the moment, and I didn't have the time to fix that. I neither found anybody really proficient in doing that. So if you found the same problem and know how to solve that, I would be very glad that if you drop me an email. So the aim of all this work is that we can assess at the end our learners or ourselves in the learning platform about the results of our learning, so the learning outcome. And we can do that within a course, within the activity on one level. And under each activity we can see the grades of all the students who have done this activity. And we can see it at the course level. Then we can select a single user in the single view. We have a lot of options, and I will not show them all, just the most basic one. And you can see I hide here the identity of the student, but you can see here this student in mathematics of primary school in Spain achieved a grade 10, here no grade, here 8, 4. I have to say this is still a testing platform, so it's not the fault of the student, it's more the fault of my development. And it will get you an average number for the whole course, which you can use then as a kind of score for the final evaluation. In my case, what I do is I have courses as child courses for other courses. So I have, for example, a primary class course, and inside the primary class I have the, let's say, primary class K4, and inside K4 I have language and mathematics, and inside mathematics sometimes I have only one course, and according to the level I have several. Here I have several because we have challenges for each day. We have reasoning, geometry, arithmetic, and this is the parent course mathematics, which already arranges different courses. So you have really a lot of potential to combine that, and always to keep track of the grade but also of the competency. What you can do if you have the same problem like me and you cannot directly assist the grade of a competency, what you can do is just to change instead of attaching evidence, you complete the competency if the certain conditions are fulfilled, and you say they must have a score and they must achieve at least grade 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever. I spoke about the learning plans, which are giving problems. The idea is that we have templates of learning plans. As you can see, I developed them. I have, for example, for secondary school level 3, I made this template and it was working, and it looks really, really great, because you have really a kind of a benchmark where you can see everything, and the student as well. But for some reason this is not working anymore, so we will have to speak about it later on. Now what I really want to speak about is frameworks. Competencies in frameworks. When we go to the site administration, now we are not at the course level, we are at the administration level of all the courses. We can define frameworks. As you can see, I have, for example, 21st century skills, and I have a piano standard, I have common language standards, the international standard of UNESCO, and here this is the Spanish one, and this is the German one, which I'm using at the moment for testing. You can also see that the German is not ready yet, because it's really missing a lot of competences. You can see it also because of the number. A national standard has usually between 5,000 and 10,000 items. So you get also an idea about the dimension of this work. And when you have defined it at the administrative level of the platform, then in each course you can use any of them, and you can use several of them. So you have the opportunity to add, for example, let's say in a music class, you can add the Lehrplan Plus from the Germans, and you look for the music activity there, the music competences they expect from the German standard. But you can also add the international standard to it, so students can compare and say, okay, on the international level I'm here. And you could add, for example, a music standard from a music private music method. That's all possible, and it makes it really, really flexible. But we need to speak a common language. This is the Lehrplan Plus from the German national standard. This is the one of Bavaria, so it's not for all Germany. It's a little bit different because in Spain they have only one per country. Here we have one per region, Land, so it's a little bit different, but it doesn't matter. One of the challenges or key questions will be, is there any way to download these kind of frameworks in a CSV file? In the last year, Ministry of Education and their relevant institutes or related institutes have done a huge effort in digitalizing all these standards. This was not the case like 5 years ago. Most was in PDF documents. But now we have more and more software they are providing, and it would be actually fantastic to get either LOD, open data, which has a common framework in metadata, and we could just draw them in, or even to have some sort of API and directly connect them to the platforms, but we are still far off. The Lehrplan Plus defines for each knowledge or competence areas of knowledge and contents. So for example, I have a coding system which is not very elegant because it becomes quite long, but it works. This competence is called like that in the Lehrplan Plus. And exactly in the same way I have to prepare a CSV file, because this is how Moodle works, where this very same competence appears in that way. And then I'm able to import it into my competency framework in Moodle, and it looks like that. You see, this is the same competency we have from the Lehrplan Plus, and that is what I actually want to achieve, because that way teachers can draw it in to their course and say this activity is related in English to the solar system and the planets in our solar system. So one of the questions I have is a technical one. How must taxonomy be to make it better and faster? Because here, if you see, we can have under the Lehrplan Plus a category Grundschule, inside the category the Jahrgangsstufe, which is the age level, and then we could have a category Mittelschule, and under this subgroups or subcategories of the different age levels, and then the different disciplines, and then the questions and so on. I splitted it. I directly have the age level, and for this reason I have like 20 subgroups directly under the Lehrplan Plus, and not only 9 or so. I'm not really sure what is better, to have a lot of items per group or to have a lot of subgroups. In any case, starting from 3,000 items, loading can become challenging. I mean, it depends on your machine, but there is still some improvement, and I'm always thinking how to make that better, also from a technical point of view. Because it is in the code, and it is in the way we create frameworks. for Germany, for example, I have 5 levels. Actually, it's 6, but I limited that to 5. In Spain, I have only 3 levels. But the Spanish one is loading slower because in the 3 levels I have 8,000 items in altogether. So I have the intuition it depends more on the quantity of items per learning framework. So it might also be an approach that we create individual frameworks for each discipline and combine them afterwards in the courses. This is also a possibility. In any case, I'm not only worried in that. I'm only worried in the way how we can search and do all these kind of things. And if we have different different learning plans, that would actually not create a problem. I feel, but this is something to think over. The other thing is the fast upload. I mean, technologically, this is no problem. I can upload. Yeah, I think I can upload also 20,000 items at once. So far, I didn't find any problems. Limitations are SQL and your machine. But I have never found limitations so far. It's just might take a little bit slower, but it's so quick. Yeah. The question is more the workflow. What is better? To have a SCV file we can download and upload, an API through LOD. At the moment, I'm inclined to think the SCV is the best interconnectability for the simple task that we can also collaborate with a small area in India and they will be able to use it and to do that. They do not even need an internet connection actually. They can download it in the city center on a stick and then upload it on their local computer. They do not need anything else. And that makes it a plus, I think, unless we are all super interconnected. It is also quite simple and helps really to understand what is happening in the background, which I feel is not the best thing to do in this stage of development. And the key question is how to connect contents with competencies. We will come to this. Now, the way I design a learning content. Really, one of the major issues I have is the relationship between different aspects of learning. We are speaking about competencies, which means usually skills and knowledge. We speak about contents, which means themes, topics, methods. We speak about key questions, also problems, which is very close to it. And then we have applications, projects, actions, objects we produce. And these are completely different learning approaches which focus on each of these points. And frameworks are usually only based on competencies. Libraries and academic disciplines are usually organized along content. So what they do is usually connect competencies with content in some way, and then you say, and the key questions and what to do with the applications. This is where the teacher has to start thinking and losing time. That is not the worst problem. The worst problem is in the mind of the learner and in the mind of the mentor. These aspects cannot be divided. They are always together. So there must be something that unifies it and creates a related framework. And this is a big question for me, how that really goes. And that is the key of my work currently. That is what I'm actually developing. Then are 3 things we do not really know where to do and where to put. Activities. Activities. Do these 4 aspects connect to activities? I feel you can connect them to activities, but you can connect them also in different ways. So you could connect them to an outcome. And scales, where shall they go? And how do you weight that? Yeah, these are open questions which are very, very important if we want an efficient way of really automizing learning. And if I say automizing learning designs, I'm not thinking so much about having an app and you put 3 buttons and then you get a ready lesson plan. That would be great. But what I'm mostly thinking is about the pedagogical theory behind it. I feel there are, if we cannot automize something, we do not really understand it, because automation is nothing else than really understanding the whole process and the thought process, the work done, the data involved, and everything related to learning. And so for me, this is more a thought experiment, and there might be some product like an app or not, but the important thing is to understand what are we actually doing, connecting all these kind of things. So I have a very, very basic prototype, which is really not very nice, and if you are interested in knowing how I do that, do not lose time. I'm using App Genie. This is, I do not remember his name, I will write it in the comments. A very nice Egyptian guy who is really great in developing this software for many years now, and I'm so thankful that he did that. And I'm using that to do prototypes based on PHP and SQL, and everything related to competencies, I name it in the same way. You cannot see, that is the back end, as Moodle does, just as a standard. There might be a better one, but since I want to integrate it, I use it in that way. And what you can see, I have all these different levels and define the country, the institution, and so on. So you can search for it and you can connect activities, key questions, and contents to a competency. The Germans, for example, have already defined contents, Inhalte, related to competencies. So I use this, we can see here from the Lernplan Plus, I use this to add it here to the relevant competence. Now, this was a long talk about very little. Actually, there is a lot to say, more to say, but I only started to sharing that. This is actually the first time I speak about my work. I only did that for myself so far, and I think there is a lot of potential, and before entering into more details, I might make more videos on very specific questions. Yeah, perhaps one word on this. Why I'm doing that is that at the end I can create a catalog of activities which are based on a course level and then the activity level, and then I have different sections of the activity. I did that in a very similar way as Novigado did, but I have a little bit different approach from the back end in the way that I integrate like CLIL learning, like outdoor learning, like these kind of things. And you can also define the place where it happens and everything. So this is something that is the idea that you can really start searching learning content based on a place, for example a heritage place like the Augsburg water management system, or you can use a community, for example like the life of Amish in the United States, and they could teach us something about horse training, for example. They teach me a lot about horse training. So sorry. And just filter it, and we could say, okay, I want to learn about this place, the Taj Mahal in India, but I'm from Canada and I want a Canadian framework, and you could search for it if there is something matching. Yeah, Google could help us with that actually. Goals. Well, if somebody starts sharing content and working more systematically on things, you also start dreaming. And I have a few dreams. I would really like that this content becomes fully automized, based on a few parameters, as I already explained. That there is a coherent integration of all learning approaches, as I explained in the beginning. It should be simple and intuitive for self-learners and also for mentors. I'm especially thinking about mentors who are more specialized in other activities. Think about a coach who is more a psychologue and might have wonderful training approaches, but is not really aware of all the topics in physics and chemistry, but would like to create a STEAM approach. That should be possible. Nowadays we are able to do that. And think about a kindergarten teacher. They really know a lot about the psychology of these small inhabitants of our planet, but they are perhaps not so trained in certain contents or other things, so they could integrate it easily. Or think about a secondary school teacher with a lot of projects, with a lot of trips, field trips and so on, too busy to take really a lot of time. Either he has to repeat the course every year, he will be burned out, or she has a tool at hand which makes her work easier. I hope also that this could help to reduce costs and also time in implementing learning content. As you see, I'm a content designer. I try to get rid of my job. It should be fast and simple in adapting content. So if we want to create a new learning path or a different context, just reuse material. This is the idea. Create once and reuse. And it should be also, this is another key aspect why I use these contents, because I create a lot of learning experiences in virtual environments like Minecraft or Mozilla Hub or other online games and online worlds, and it would be fantastic to have an assessment of these learning experiences related to this content, or even a way to integrate it, like with Moodle, also in Minecraft. I'm working on that in a different project currently. Some requirements. Of course, if I really want to go on with that project and to share it more, that there need to be a kind of roadmap where at a certain point I can also register and patent things, because otherwise I'm sure there are larger companies who will just take it over. And this is not only a question of the effort, it's also a question to keep the work inside a community. Then the whole plugin for the OS platforms like Moodle should actually be already developed before we integrate AI, just to understand where the connection points are and how we can do that. Because I think there should be a kind of plugin, so that if somebody uses WordPress or Drupal or Moodle, can simply draw this in, like with one click or so, and upload it to his personal platform and use it in courses, and that should be smoother. A front end would be nice as well. Of course, AI development is a key, but as I said, more also as a thought experiment. If we achieve it, that would be fantastic, because we could really start thinking about using IoT, the Internet of Things, as a kind of learning platform. Perhaps we will not even need any learning platforms in the future. We just need a browser. That is, yeah, my idea somehow. And of course, there must be more cooperation directly with the national institutions and with schools. If you belong to one of both or either, I would be very, very happy if you contact me if you are interested. because this must be something that first of all serves schools, even though this has an approach for self-learners, but self-learners often have less problems than the more tight, organized system of the school management. And of course it will require some documentation and distribution. So this is more or less my my workflow, what I'm looking for. And this time scale, I started in 2012, but this is not like that I worked on it constantly. I made a spreadsheet by then, and I used it for 5 years without modifying it because it worked very well. I already started with Moodle, but it was like too complicated for me because it has a certain learning curve. So I did that just playing around but not really use it. And in the last 4 years, I started intensively using Moodle. And of course, I wanted more and more to combine what I do with my spreadsheet also with Moodle. And this is when I started developing my spreadsheet into a relational database, and this is what currently is the current state of art. I call this software at the moment Scenario, just because in the European school network we call this learning scenario. So, but yeah, this is still all open. Currently I work very much on the prototyping and thinking over logical relations and demands. I hope that until the beginning of next year I can have a full implementation of my version and really work with it, especially because I want it for my job, and it will make my work easier to develop learning content. And starting from next spring, summer, I would like to start with AI, but also the pedagogical assessment. So I would like to have a catalog of questions that assess my software to understand if it is pedagogically good to do it in the way I do it. And this is not only for the software development, this is also to think over how we use frameworks and how we integrate them, because there is a lot of pedagogy in using frameworks and doing frameworks. That is another topic. And to evaluate it a few months later, and then in 2024 to do the same for the psychological aspects. And yeah, I'm perhaps too optimistic, but it would be really cool to have an integration of IoT in some way by 2025, which means that we could directly from the Moodle draw content from internet in, like most teachers use YouTube videos. So it would be great to have a kind of search engine that is based on this competency framework and draws in the relevant videos connected to our platform. So as you see, this also means that as a content designer, we will have to bear in mind that more and more content will be distributed. At the moment we work very much on platforms and we have our content and we create a book and sell it, but it will be more and more like little chunks that are exchanged, and Moodle is already going into this direction, that you can exchange the learning content in little chunks and just share it with others for a price or for free. It is independent of the economic model we want to give it. So the idea is technologically we can do that, economically we can consider it in any form. The question is, why are we not doing it? Just because it is a lot of work. So this is all. You can scan this QR code or copy this into your browser. I would be very, very thankful if you could just give me a short feedback on your own experience, on one side on my talk, if you have some ideas, if you have some input, but also on your own experience with these questions and how you address it, and yeah, what would you dream of? Thank you very much.